Welcome to the International School of Tailoring. My name is Reza and this is going to be your third lesson of our How to Make a Bespoke Jacket series. In the previous lesson, we looked at some pressing tools. Now, as promised, I'm going to show you two types of hams that I think are going to be essential for the construction of our jacket. The first one is a round and wide ham, which we're going to use for mainly the hip area, pockets, the collar, and things like that. The second one is a narrower and longer ham, which is used for pressing the chest of our forepart. Obviously, these are small versions and I'm using them to just demonstrate the techniques. But if you want to get a large-scale pattern, you can do that by clicking on the link in the description of this video and download the pattern. So, what are we going to need? The first thing that we're going to need is going to be a canvas. This can be made of linen or cotton. This canvas is also known as the skeleton layer. This is the inside of our ham, which holds all the scraps. On top of this canvas, we're going to have a layer of felt. Ideally, a stiff felt around 4 to 5 millimeters thick, which is about 1/4 of an inch. And this will smooth out everything if we have any lumps because of our fillers. Now, once we have created the inner back, we're going to create the outer back, the cover layer, and that is going to be our fabric. I'm going to be using moleskin because it's durable, it's dense, smooth, and tightly woven, but if you don't have access to moleskin, you can also use a heavy-duty flannel. After that, we're going to use some fabric scraps to fill our bag, but if you don't want to use fabric scraps or you have something else, you can use fiber fillers. This is used to make teddy bears and things like that, cushions, or paper or cardboard shreds. You can also alternatively use sawdust. Just be mindful that if you're using paper or sawdust, it can rot over time because there's going to be a lot of moisture and heat there. So mix it up with some baking soda to prevent molds from growing inside your ham. So, having said that, this is what we're going to do. First of all, I will explain to you what makes a good pressing surface. After that, we're going to draft the patterns for both of these hams, and last but not least, we're going to construct them. Now, please keep in mind, if you've never made a ham before, this is not something you do in 10 minutes. You will at least need 1 to 2 days for this. So, if you're ready, let's go. So what makes an ideal pressing surface? Well, to answer that question, we have to understand what we're doing when we're pressing. Now, let's imagine that we have our golden iron here, and we begin to press with this golden iron. When we are pressing, we are producing pressure plus heat plus moisture. Now, pressure, heat, and moisture makes our cloth susceptible to wrinkles when there is no iron on it. So, therefore, we want our material to cool as quickly as possible, even though we are applying pressure, heat, and moisture. The last thing you want is to press something smooth, pick it up, put it aside, and then, purely because of it being damp, it starts to wrinkle. So, we have to therefore create a pressing surface that absorbs heat and moisture. How do we do that? Well, if we are talking about our board, let's say this is our board, we need to have some sort of a material that allows heat and moisture to go through. Wood does that perfectly. If we're talking about the ham, let's say this is our ham, fabric scraps or sawdust or anything that allows air to flow through it and also doesn't melt is ideal. On top of this surface, we need to have a layer of felt. So let's say on our board, that's going to be our 6 millimeter or 1/4 of an inch layer of felt, and on our ham, we're going to have exactly the same. Why do we need a layer of felt? Well, it's very simple. If you have, imagine you have a piece of fabric and the end of that fabric is folded on itself 2 or 3 times. If you try to take your iron and press this down, the one end of your iron is going to sit on the edge, on the raised edge, and the other side is going to sit on the flat end. There will be a gap sometimes in between your material and the iron. However, if we have this cushion underneath it, part of the thick material can sink into the cushion while the flat area just remains in place, and that allows our iron to provide an even coverage on the material that we're trying to press. Okay, then on top of that, we need our board cloth or the cover fabric for our ham. And that, in this case, is this purple line and on our board as well. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this fabric has to be dense, smooth, and fairly heavyweight because you don't want to have your needle catch the yarns as you're basting on it. You don't want to have the impression of the thick yarns, perhaps a herringbone weave or something like that, to imprint themselves on your lining. And at the same time, you want it to be durable. So having said that and knowing about pressing surfaces and how to create one, let's go ahead and make ham number one. Now, although our ham is round and smooth, it is based on a geometrical shape. So before we draft our pattern, we have to define what geometrical shape this is. And obviously this is a cylinder. So if you want to make this ham and we want to draft a pattern, we would say, all right, we are dealing with a cylinder, and to make this cylinder, we have to determine what the depth is going to be of the cylinder, what the width is going to be of this cylinder, and what the length is going to be. So we have a top panel, a bottom panel, which you see here, and we have the side panel which connects the top and the bottom together. So knowing this, you'll be ready to draft your pattern based on the measurements that you choose. Maybe you say, hey, I want my ham to be a perfect circle when you look at it from the top, or you want it to be an oval. That doesn't really matter. As long as you know that this is your top and bottom panel with a depth, length and width on all the sides, then you're ready to go. So, having said that, let's draft our pattern. I'm going to be drafting the pattern right here, and you'll see what I'm doing represented in two different ways on my right hand side. The top one is a three-dimensional schematic of our finished assembled ham, and the bottom one is the finished flat pattern. Now, by doing that, I hope that I can relate every line that I'm drafting to each one of these representations, which should make it easier for you to follow along. Let's begin. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to establish our center line, and that is going to be the line on which we measure the length of our ham. Now, since we have a circle at the end, it doesn't really matter whether the width or the length are different because they're going to be the same. But if you have a rectangle or a longer shape, you can change these accordingly. So I've drawn the length. I'm going to draw the middle point based on the pattern master so that I have my center point as my reference. Then I'm going to mark, let's say, 12 centimeters for this example at the top and bottom. Now, mind you, I'm making a small version. If you want to make a bigger version, just change the measures accordingly. Then I'm going to mark the width. So I'm going to square across the center point. I'm going to draw my line, and I'm going to again mark 12 centimeters on either side of the center point. Now, as you can see, we have this cross in the middle, which is exactly the cross that we have on the top and bottom panel of our ham. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a black color to draw this square shape that you see here around my ham, just to have the construction lines of the circle. So, squaring across from the width and the length marks. And now we have a square. Again, if you're making a longer or wider ham, yours may be a rectangle, but a square is an easy approach to follow along with. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to mark this curve to turn it into a circle. The easiest way to do that is just to cut the square out. I'm going to be folding it once in half along the green line, whether the length or the width, doesn't matter on a square. And then I'm going to fold it again along the green line. And now I have a smaller square, which is 1/4 of the total square. Now, here is the part that you have to pay attention. There are two sides that have a fold, and there are two sides that have a raw edge. We want to draft this curve on the sides of the raw edges, not on the sides of the curves. You can do two things. You can either just curve the edges, which would give you a square, with rounded corners, like so. Or if you want to go and create a full circle, you'll go from one point, one corner, right to the other, like that. And then once you've drafted your curve, you will cut through all layers, and when you open it up, you have a nice looking circle. Now, the next thing that we have to do is to mark the notches at each one of these intersecting points where the green line and the edge of our pattern meet. So what I'll do is I'm gonna mark a notch here, 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 and mark a notch here. So we have 4 notches in total. After that, I will have to mark the notches for the opening. Now the opening is the area where we're going to insert the filler fibers or other materials that we have into our ham. So it's important to make sure that this opening is not too small, because otherwise we wouldn't be able to get anything in there. But it should also not be too big, because you have to sew it with your hand and it's going to just take extra time. So I'll go for an area that is roughly 1/3 in between the 2 red notches. So I'll make a notch here and I'll make a notch here. That should be sufficient. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to have to measure around the circumference of this circle so that we know what the length of our gusset, which is this part here that connects the top and bottom together, has to be. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure around from one notch all the way back to that same notch. You can also just measure, if it's just a perfect quarter, you can just measure from one notch to the other and multiply that by 4. And that is 29 inches for me. And what's that? That's roughly like 73.5 centimeters. So here's how we draw our gusset. We are not going to draft the full length gusset. We're going to only use half of that. I'm first going to draft a straight line. Then I'm going to square off one end. Whatever the depth is of that gusset, you'll decide. And then square off again, extend the line. And now what you have to do is apply 1/2 of the total circumference. In our case, it was 29, from one end to the other. 14.5 is going to be 29. And I'm going to square over, and that is the total, half the total length of our gusset. Normally, I would add a seam allowance because that gusset is going to be cut on the fold from one side, but the other side is going to be open. So we will have to bring this all round and close it on one end, which is the seam allowance or the sewing line that you see right here on our representation. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take a seam off right from the edge, which will make the gusset a little bit shorter than the total circumference. And the reason why I do that is we are going to force a straight strip of fabric on a round curve. And when we do that, and I can show you with an example, if we take a straight edge and we go around the circle, you'll see that we are creating surpluses. Now sometimes these surpluses move around and they form pleats under the foot of your machine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make the gusset slightly shorter all around so that we don't end up having too much surplus when we are machining. The way I do that is the following. Here we have a fold line, so this is going to be cut on the fold of the fabric. Then we have half the total circumference measure. And I'm just going to take a seam of a good quarter or 5 millimeters or 6 millimeters, not more than 1 centimeter, of this edge. So from fold up to this line, which is our sewing line, we will have half the total circumference minus 5 millimeters or a quarter. And that's going to be it. So I'm going to cut this out and then we're going to mark the notches. All right, so let's look at our representations again. We have the top and bottom panel along with the center lines. We have the red notches, which are displaying a quarter of our circle. And we have the notches for the opening. The grayed out area here is the seam allowance of our gusset, and the line right here is the sewing line. That's this line here. If we would follow this along for the marking of our notches, we would say that the sewing line is matching one of the notches, which is right here. And then right next to it, there are 2 notches for the opening, and so we can easily do that by simply putting the sewing line on our notch, which is right the green line, and then gently roll this over, and once the edges meet, put a notch here, continue, put a notch there, and we can do that by just continuing further and putting a notch here, and then going all the way, and this one will just meet the fold. However, to mark the rest of these red notches, I'm going to do it slightly differently. I'm going to fold the seam allowance so that the edge that I have now is the sewing line, because that is really where the fabric is going to be joined. And then I'm going to fold it in half, like so. And when I open it up, this is really the correct position of where our notch has to be. And a notch here, and we also have a notch here, and a notch here. This is what's going to happen when we go on the machine. First, we're going to close the gusset by sewing both open ends right on the sewing line. Then we're going to match the notches of our sewing line along with the notch on our top panel, and we're going to sew around. We're going to allow for a gap here, so we're not going to close the opening. This is going to go around, this is going to go around, then this is going to go around from notch until they match. We're going to match this notch, and we're going to continue going around, continue going around until, the last notch matches here, and then the rest is going to be exactly the same. So that is really it. Now that we've drafted our pattern, let's go ahead and make it. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to cut out our skeleton layer, which is the inner bag. Then we're going to cut out the felt, which is going to cover the top of the ham. And then last but not least, we're going to trace our pattern on our cover layer, which is our outer fabric. And instead of cutting on the chalk lines on this particular layer, we're going to cut 5 millimeters inside to make it 5 millimeters all around smaller so that it can hug the ham firmly. So let's begin by cutting our skeleton layer. Now I have to say that normally I would cut or mark using a chalk, but for the purposes of demonstration I'm going to be using a black pencil just so that you can see everything all very well. So this is on the fold, and I won't be spraying this and wetting this. I'm just going to go over it with a dry iron, because if we would put moisture or water on this, it's going to contract, and we want this to contract once the ham is sewn up and completely filled so that it makes the ham firmer. So I will place my gusset on the fold, going to put a weight on it, and then I'm also going to put my top and bottom panel. Usually if I have a fold and there is some extra room, I will always place my pattern away from the fold, because this is on a fold and it can be opened up, and so if you have any fabric left over, it may be big enough to maybe cut another ham. Let's put this hand on, and I'm going to be tracing all around and mark all the red notches plus the white ones for the opening. But of course I can't mark with white on here, so I'll be marking the white notches in black. And then I'll take my pattern off, and then I'll make sure that the notches are marked on the inside line of my pattern so that when I cut it out, I don't lose them. And now for the gusset. And that is our gusset marked as well. Make sure to bring your notches inside your pattern. And now we're going to continue cutting it out. One thing I have to explain to you is that we only need one opening on this particular ham. And although we have 2 layers to cut through, we are only going to mark or cut the notches on one top layer of the fabric, so not on both of them, because otherwise we'll end up with 2 openings and then we have to sew them closed anyway. So let's cut them out. So now that I've cut both of them out, I'm going to mark or make a small cut on the red notches on both layers, just so that when you open this edge up you can see a notch. We will need that for matching our panels on the machine. But the black notches, which are for the opening, I will only be marking that on the top layer, like so. just put an X on the wrong side of your fabric for your reference so that you don't end up with one seam allowance on the outside and the other on the inside. So I'll put this aside and continue cutting the gusset. Keep your scraps. So now, again, I'm going to mark, just put a small cut on all the areas where we have a red notch. And the cut is going to go through both layers. Here I'll be making a small V. And the black notches, which are for the opening, again, only on one side of the layers. So, mark the wrong side. This is what's going to happen when we go on the machine. We will first close this one end of the gusset by putting right side to right side, of course. And then once we've done that, we will look at our notches and use them as a reference and then match the notches. So, for example, this is going to go right here, and then that's going to go right there, and then that's going to go right there, and it's going to go all around until we have a cylinder. And then the second panel is also going to go right there. This aside, I am now going to cut the felt. Now the felt can be used to cover the top or the bottom or both of them. I'm just going to cover the top, so I'm going to cut one layer for simplicity's sake. And like I mentioned before, this is a very thin felt. Ideally, you would have a very thick and firm, perhaps 1/4 of an inch, not more than that, but it should be really firm. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to put our top panel on the felt, mark around it, and cut it out. For this, we don't need any notches, so all we need is just to circle the round form of our panel. Okay, so we have that as well. No need to mark a wrong or right side. And now we're going to cut out our outer fabric, which is our cover layer. Again, we're going to place the gusset on the fold of the fabric and our top and bottom panel away from the fold. Mark around, mark the notches, mark the opening notches, and do exactly the same. However, once we're going to cut 5 millimeters all around on the inside line of the pattern. Because we're going to cut this smaller, I will extend the notches just a little bit more so that by the time we cut about 5 millimeters inside, we still have our notches. Feel free to mark 5 millimeters all around. I'm just going to do it by eye. Just be careful when you're going around the circle. You can easily spiral inwards, so keep your concentration high. And if you have to move your fabric, feel free to do that. So, now that it's cut, again, mark or cut your notches on both layers, the red ones that is. And mark the opening notches just on the top layer. Put that aside and do the same for the gusset. Once again, mark the red notches on both layers and the black ones on one layer only. We have our skeleton layer, we have our outer layer, and we have our felt to cover the top. Let's go ahead and machine them. Okay, so we're at the machine and we're ready to machine our first ham. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to take our gusset and we're going to close the open end. So if you have your gusset, make sure that it's right side to right side, and at the end of the opening we will have 2 notches. We will machine from the top to the bottom and obviously do a back tack at the beginning and at the end. I'm using a contrast thread so that you can see my sewing, and I would say that it's advisable to use a smaller stitch for extra strength. Cut your thread on both ends, and now what we have done is we have closed the gusset and it's turned into a circular tape. The next thing we have to do is to prepare our top panel with the felt. We're going to place the felt against the right side of our fabric. Make sure that all the edges are matching, and we're going to pin around just to keep the felt in place and then we're going to sew around right a foot's width on the edge of the pattern. So once you've pinned around, make sure that everything is flat and that you don't have any surpluses laying around. The stitch that we're going to do is going to be a foot's width, meaning that the edge of my fabric is aligned with the edge of the foot of the machine, and it's going to be a foot's width all around, including the area where we have marked for the opening. This is just to hold the felt and the fabric together so that when we are joining the gusset, the felt is going to go into the seam, and once we turn it inside out, the felt is covering the top of the skeleton bag nicely. So let's do this. Take your pins out as you get close to them, so not to break your needle, and use your hands really well. Hold on to it. Make sure that nothing else in the area moves. And when you get to the end, instead of doing a back tack, just continue sewing about 1/2 inch, maybe 1.5 centimeters on your previous starting point. That is a back tack on its own. Cut your thread, and now we have the felt machined around our fabric. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the gusset and just open the seam with our hands. If you're using a cotton or a linen fabric, this should be fairly easy to do without having to use the iron. And then we're going to find the opening notches. We're going to take our top panel and we're going to find the notches on that as well. And then, since the felt is on the right side, make sure you put a snip there so that you can see it from the felt side as well. We're going to put the gusset right side to right side, so the right side of the gusset to the right side of the top panel, and match the opening notches and put a pin in both of them. So once you've done that, you should have this seam right next to one of your red notches, which is at the quarter of your circle. Pin that in place as well. Next, we're going to move around until we find our next notch here, and we're going to match the notch of the gusset to that as well. Continue all the way. So we now have a pin at each notch. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a pin in between each one of these notches, making sure that this so-called surplus that we have here in between is distributed equally. The way you do that is to bring everything to the middle and then just gently pull it apart or lift the edges upwards, which should split that surplus in two. Now, if you remember, I mentioned that the gusset should be slightly shorter than the circumference for exactly this reason. It is technically more correct to have the gusset exactly the same length as the circumference of the circle, but because these surpluses arise, having the gusset slightly shorter will make it easier for us to machine around without having too much surplus. So I'm going to make sure that I distribute in between each one of my notches this ease or this surplus evenly, and I'm going to do that in between each of the notches. Another way to do it is just with your thumb, hold it in your hand, push everything to the middle, and then bring the edge down so that the edges match, and then pull evenly outwards. Repeat all the way. Once you've done that, do exactly the same in between the rest of your pins to make sure that the entire gusset is pinned around without any surpluses in the middle. So once you've pinned around and everything is nice and neatly pinned, we're going to go back to one of our opening notches and start our sewing right at the opening notch. Do a back tack. This time the seam allowance is not going to be a foot's width, it's going to be 1 centimeter or 3/8. So you will see about 5 millimeters of fabric or material sticking out. Then we're going to sew all around until we get to the other opening notch, and we're going to do a back tack there as well. If you find that as you're machining you're getting a lot of surplus being pushed forwards, hold the surplus, pull it outwards as to hold it tight, and then see if you can press everything down. And if that doesn't do the job, take 1 or 2 pins out, and as your needle is in the material, lift your foot, pull the material a little bit, so to make everything tight and flat. Okay, let's give this a go. So let's say I'm machining and I have this surplus laying around, and the distance between my needle and the pin is not enough for me to be able to distribute that. What I will do is, first of all, I'll pull this back and see if I can flatten it out. It seems that I can, but if it's still too much, take the pin out, pull your materials, all layers together, and then you can see instantly that everything is flattened. And just make sure that you're holding this in the right place. Don't let it just fall down. You are in control. So always keep it perpendicular to the edge of your fabric. So hold this, hold everything down, and machine. And when you get to the other opening notch, just do a back tack, and that's it. Take your pins out, cut your threads, and now you've sewn the gusset to the first top panel. What will happen is, once we flip this inside out, you'll see that the felt is nice and neatly caught in the seam. Let's continue and do exactly the same with the bottom panel. Identify where the notches are. There are no opening notches on this side of our gusset and our panel, so all we have are 4 notches. Right side to right side, pin, move around, pin some more, match the notches, do this all around, then do the distribution in between, and then you're ready to sew. And this time when you're sewing, you're going to sew all around, because we're not going to have an opening here on this side. And also remember, your sewing line at your seam allowance is also a notch, in case that gets you confused. Now, there is a chance that you've pinned from the side of your bottom panel to the gusset. However, I would advise you to always pin from the side of the gusset, because that is the side where the surplus is, and you're going to be machining with the side of the surplus up. So the gusset in our case is going to be upwards. That should help you to see exactly where there is extra surplus and to control it. If you're doing it from the other side, you may have extra pleats or whatsoever, and so if you have, just like I have, pinned from the top panel or the bottom panel side, just turn it around and put the pin inside from the gusset side. All pinned around, let's begin sewing. Make sure that everything is out of the way. If you have a stiff felt machine to your top layer, it may be a bit difficult and tricky to handle everything, but I'm sure you can. Now, again, there is no opening, so we can start or begin anywhere we like and go full circle. Done. Cut your threads. And that is our skeleton layer, our inner bag, done. Now, I know that some of you are going to be super fussy and try to make this an absolute work of art, and if they see a smallest amount of puckering, maybe they're going to redo it. I would like to encourage that. If you can make it neat, but be realistic. This is the inside layer of a ham. So it's a lot better to allocate your resources and energy and time wisely on the things that matter. Make it as neat as you can, but don't be crying about small puckers and small errors in your sewing. As long as the notches match and everything is in place, this will be a perfect inner bag to hold the scraps. So now let's do exactly the same without the felt on the outer layer. Now you may see that I don't have a marking on the wrong side of my outer layer. I simply forgot, and you may too. So what I would say is always double check when you're on the machine to see whether your fabric is right side to right side or wrong side to wrong side, because some fabrics look the same on both sides. Now fortunately I'm using moleskin, so that has a soft side with the pile, so I'm going to be using that side as the right side. So let's close first of all our gusset, right side to right side. These notches are going to be our sewing line. Cut your thread and just with your fingers open the seam. You can even use the back side of your scissors to really press this down, like so. Again, I'm going to take my top panel. I can see the notches. The red notches are the quarters of the circle. The black notches are the opening notches. I'm going to put right side to right side, but I'm not going to pin from the side of the top panel. I'm going to pin from the side of the gusset. Pin the other opening. Another way that you can distribute your ease is to simply put your fingers between the gusset and the circle, and then with your 2 index fingers, push everything aside up to your pins to keep everything tight, and then with your thumb, push the center and align the edge. Once you've pinned around, again, identify the first opening notch, take a 3/8 or 1 centimeter seam allowance from the edge, and begin your sewing. Go full circle until the other opening notch. Then again, when you get to the opening notch, back tack, cut your thread, take your pin out, and do exactly the same on the other side with the bottom panel. Don't forget, right side to right side, match the notches and machine all around. Once pinned, machine around. Doesn't matter where you begin, as long as you go full circle. And when you get to the end, just overlap your previous stitching, cut your thread, and that's both of our bags done. So let's take them to the board and prepare them for being filled up. All right, so now that we've machined both of our bags, we have to prepare the seam allowances before we fill them up. So what we're going to do is the following. We're going to begin with the skeleton layer. We're going to put our finger inside the opening, and we're going to fold the seam allowance towards the gusset. All of it. All of these layers are going to be folded towards the gusset. Now when you do this, make sure that you're really smoothing out this seam allowance and you're opening it, and that nothing is rolled upwards like that. So we're going to take a piece of basting thread, take a decent sized needle like a number 5 or a number 6, thread your needle up, don't make a knot, and begin by pressing the seam allowance towards the gusset, and with a padding stitch secure the seam allowance so that it is held down by the stitch. The reason why I do that and don't press the seam allowances, because pressing seam allowances is going to take a lot of time, and by the time you flip this inside out, the seams are still going to be all over the place. So this will really hold them down. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all around, and as I'm going all around, I'm just going to pull this gusset apart, press down the seam allowance, making sure that it's clear on the inside and nothing is pleated up, and just do a padding stitch that goes over the edge, inside the gusset, out on the seam allowance, like so, and I will continue doing that, and that will hold the edges down. So let's go all around. If your thread is finishing, just do a back tack twice and start over again until you've gone all around. I've done this side. I still have a little piece here that I have to do. I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do exactly the same with the bottom side. Now if you've put a felt piece at the bottom as well, you'll just repeat the same process. And try to hold this in a way that is natural to your hand. So don't try to go, like this and twist your wrist or whatsoever in weird ways. Just hold it naturally as your wrist moves, pull them apart, pull the seam allowance back, and this time we go from the seam allowance into the gusset. All right, so now that we have basted the seams to the gusset, what we have to do is the following. We will have to flip this inside out, and then we will have to baste the edge of the opening onto itself so that it stays closed and the edges don't fray when we are filling our ham. So I'm just going to do a running stitch as I'm folding the seam allowance just back onto itself. And if you don't know what a running stitch is, you can always refer back to our video on how to do a running stitch. So, and I'm going to do the same with the other top. Okay, so now that we've prepared the skeleton bag, we're going to do exactly the same on the outer bag, which is our fabric. Like the skeleton layer, we're going to flip this inside out, and we're going to baste the seam allowances of the openings onto themselves. So, once we've done that, we are going to do the following. We're going to take our skeleton layer, which is, of course, larger than our outer layer, and we're going to carefully put it through inside our cover layer and then match their openings. Just remember, if you have only felt on one top, to put the felt going upwards and have the opening on the top seam, so that you always remember what the top part of your ham is going to be. Okay, now before you do anything else, just hold the openings together and go in there and make sure that you're opening the skeleton layer on the inside all around. And you can even use perhaps a ruler to really go and align the edges well together. So, I feel like I have to have two eyes on top of this and we have a smiley. So now what you have to do is to baste the opening lips together temporarily. So bring them edge to edge, make sure they are well aligned, and just go through both layers like this. You can have a knot on this side, from the outside to the inside, over the edge, all the way through. This will keep them together so that when you're filling your ham, the edges of the openings are not going to be crammed inwards, or that the inside bag, the skeleton layer, is not pushed inwards without you even noticing. Fasten on well and fasten off well. The same for the top opening. All right, so we have prepared our bags, let's say, and now we're ready to fill them up. This is going to be a very messy job if you're using fabric scraps, because all these fibers are going to go up in the air. But also if you're using sawdust, the same can happen. So I recommend you do this in a well ventilated area, or if you don't have enough ventilation, make sure you have a mask or something, and whatever you do, don't have a fan inside the room because it's going to go all over the place. So you can use whatever fiber you have, sawdust, paper scraps. I'm going to use just calico scraps that I've collected throughout time. The finer the scraps, the better you can fill your ham and the less lumps you're going to have. The worst thing you can do is just to have large pieces and just kind of like shove them in. That's going to give you a lot of lumps. So take some time and just make sure that you snip them into fine bits and pieces. Now, for this procedure, you're going to need something like a strong wooden ruler, or, you know, we all have this in our homes, to really fill the ham and to tamp this very tightly into there, because we will need a lot of this going into this small little fella. So if you're using a powder like a sawdust, or if you're using paper scraps, those can be susceptible to mold and rot. So what I recommend you do, you either take a tablespoon of baking soda, mix them into your powder, or if you don't want to do that and you have, for example, scraps, you can't obviously mix baking soda in this, I would recommend just take a tablespoon or a teaspoon of baking soda, carefully open it up, and just put a teaspoon or tablespoon, depending on the size of your ham, into your ham, and then close it off, and then just give it a good shake, and that's going to line the inside walls of your ham. And this stuff is anti-mold and it's very heat resistant, and it doesn't rot. So if you want to keep your ham for a very long time, then this will be your friend. So for this ham, I'm going to use baking soda, and because it's a small ham, I'm just going to use a teaspoon. Take a teaspoon and put it inside the skeleton layer. and you don't want to be breathing this in. So make sure it's well closed and just give it a shake. Okay, now just wait a few seconds because this is just like there in the air of the bag. If you open it up, it may kind of like just flow out. So now that this is all lined, we're going to begin filling this up. We're going to tamp, we're going to beat, we're going to press this until not one single scrap can fit in there. So let's do this. The first thing that I'm doing is I'm just filling this up roughly just, you know, about just the end of this, and I'm making sure that I'm tamping before I've completely filled it up, because you can really get every corner super tightly filled, and if you do this as you progress, you will have a very smooth ham, and if there are any lumps, you can just with your tamper even them out. Make sure you especially go into these edges, because these edges are going to be very difficult to fill once the ham is completely full. Now make sure that every once in a while you flip this over and you also smooth out everything you have on this side, because you will need both sides to be tamped down. Now, as soon as you think, oh, this is really full, I can't get anything in there, time for another beating. Now, at some point, it can get very difficult to get access to the ends of the ham because of all the scraps you have in front of you. And if you, like me, have been using a tamper with a wide end, it becomes impossible. So, you can use then, in that case, a tool with a sharp point and a good handle so that you can push and really wiggle your way through between all these scraps and get this all the way to the end, and carefully go around and filling all the empty gaps that you have at the back of your ham, because those empty gaps will cause your ham to look untidy and ripply because there's nothing behind the fabric to push it outwards. So I'm going to just fine-tune the edges of this ham. I'm going to clear my board, and then we're going to close the ham off with a draw stitch. So I think it's safe to say that this ham is completely filled. I'm going to clear the board now, and I'm going to show you how to close it off with a draw stitch. If you've never done a draw stitch before, or you don't know what that is, check out our video on how to do a draw stitch, because there I explain in full detail how to do one. Let's do this. Okay, so we are ready to close off our first ham. Now, it may be that during the filling process, your bastings that hold the lips of the two bags together are unfastened, like what I have here in front of me. We have to take them out anyway, so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take them out. It may also be the case that the inner bag is slightly distorted, like you can see here. This part of the opening should really be positioned here. So before you do anything else, I would just try to push that in and try to get the other side to be a bit more visible. Now this may take some effort, but you have to do it, because otherwise you won't be able to close your bag. So we're going to give this a tug. Now I'm actually using my pliers because it's very difficult to just access this with my hand. I need something stronger. Now I've got the other end visible, and I'm ready to close off the opening of the skeleton bag. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that everything is pushed back so that there isn't a lot of pressure on the folded edges, the lips, let's say, of the skeleton bag. Then I'm going to try to bring the center of these two together and see whether I have a mismatch in terms of length. So is the upper lip longer than the lower lip? And I'm going to look at both sides and see if there is ease or excess length that I have to distribute evenly throughout the entire line of sewing. Now it seems to me that they are pretty even on either side. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a pin to hold these two edges together. That should make it easier for me to start my sewing. And then this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a needle thread it with machine thread, double it up, and make a knot at the end. Then I'm going to insert my needle so that I begin from the inside and bring the needle outwards, just right on the edge of the folded material, like so. Then I'm going to go towards the opposite edge of where my thread is coming out, and I'm going to insert the needle right inside the fold, take a small bite, and bring the needle through the fold and outwards. And my bite is about 2 millimeters. And I'm going to pull. The next stitch is going to go right in front again of where my thread came out. And so I'm going to insert my needle right in there inside the fold. And if you have a felt and the felt is a bit kind of like fluffy, it may be difficult to identify the exact edge, but I'm going to insert it in, take a bite of about 2 millimeters, and then bring my needle out again. And that's another stitch done. I'm going to repeat this all the way right to the end, and then I'm going to show you how I fasten off. Once I've done a few stitches, I'm ready to take this pin out because the stitches are going to keep my sewing area fairly close, and so the pin is not going to get in my way. One tip that I can give you is that if there is surplus, like this wave that you see here on the hem that you're sewing close, something you can do is you can just pull the area that you have already sewn back so that this area that you still have to sew straightens out, and that makes the sewing a little bit easier. If everything is pushed there, you can't really see what you're doing and what connects to what. So pull this back, straighten this, and continue your sewing. Okay, so I've done my last stitch and I'm about to fasten off. Because this is the inside of a ham, I won't be messing around with trying to hide my stitch or whatsoever. So the simplest way to fasten off is to just do a back tack through both folded edges twice and 3 times through both folded edges. Cut your thread, and we are now ready to close the outer bag. Again, I'm going to push everything to the inside, making sure that nothing is putting any pressure on my edges. And you don't need to take these bastings out yet. These are holding your edge folded on itself, so that is actually a good thing. Bring these edges together. It may be difficult to pin, it may sometimes be even impossible, but when I bring these two together, I can see that this lower edge has a little bit of ease that I have to ease into the top layer. There is some excess. It looks like a longer line. So the way to do that is to gently push a little bit of this excess edge in as you're doing your stitch. I'm going to show you how to do that. So begin by inserting the needle from the inside to the outside. That brings the knot to the inside. Bring your edges together. See if there is any excess. There's a little bit of excess. Hold them together. Go into one of the edges, right in the middle of the folded edge. Bring your needle out and go into the opposite fold, inside the fold with your needle. Take a small bite and bring your needle out. And now, if you want to ease in your lower material, instead of going right in front of it in the opposite fold, just go a little bit further forward. By the time you pull your thread, that's going to pull everything inwards, and that is going to ease this into the top fold. Instead of going here, I'm going to insert my needle slightly more forwards, but I'm still going to take a small bite. Okay, now watch this. Did you see that little bit going inwards? And continue. Now when I go up into the other layer, I just do the normal stitch. I just go straight up, not diagonally forwards. And that's only if you have to ease in. If they're both the same, you just go straight up and straight down. Again, instead of going straight down, I just go slightly forwards with my needle on the edge that I want to ease in. Take my small bite, pull my thread, pull upwards, and now I've just eased a little bit in, just a fraction. So now I'm going to continue this all the way to the end and then show you how to fasten off. Now it may be that halfway through you have eased more than you intended, thereby making both folded edges equal in length. From this moment onwards, don't ease anything in anymore. Just go straight up into the fold, straight out, straight down into the fold, straight up again, and so on and so forth. Because otherwise you will be distorting your edges and make the other one longer. So just continue as a normal stitch once you have eased enough in. The ideal way is to ease just enough so that you can ease all the way. But sometimes we're talking about, 1/10 of a millimeter. So on fabric, that's not really possible. I'm about to do my last stitch and then I'm going to have to fasten off. And I'd like to do that in a way that is invisible. So I'm going to go inside my fold for the last time. Then come out, pull up, then go into the opposite fold. And this time, instead of going forwards into the left direction, I'm going to go back to the right. So I'm going to loop the thread between the two folds. I'm going to do that 2 or 3 times. So now I'm coming out again. I'm going to go back into the opposite fold and then move the opposite direction. And then I'm going to go into the opposite fold again. Then I'm going to move into the opposite direction. And once I've done that 2 or 3 times, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go right into the seam and then come out the seam perhaps 3/8 further out, 1 centimeter further out. Pull, go in again, right behind where your thread came out, and then come out the seam again, about 1 centimeter to 3/8. I'm going to repeat that one more time, so 3 times in total. And then I'm going to cut my thread, and the hem is now closed. Now I've used a black thread so that you have a contrasting color, so that you can see exactly what I'm doing. But if you are using a matching color, you will have a better aesthetic, let's say, and you will see the seams or the threads on the seams less. I'm going to take all the bastings out now. I'm going to show you how to press it, and that will be the end of ham number 1. Okay, so we have just closed our ham and it's now time to press it. As you're filling your ham, you may distort the fabric since you're pushing and kind of like pulling and really getting rough with the ham in the process of filling it up. So it's naturally for your ham to be distorted. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at the ham from above and see if my seam allowances are in the right place. If the sides have shifted to the top or vice versa, then it's best to fix that first before we press everything in place. So let's see. I can see that there is more seam allowance visible here. There is more of the side panel visible here than I have here, for example. So I will just try to push the fabric over from the center outwards to bring everything in place and distribute the panels evenly around the ham. Now, of course, because I've been using scraps, it's very difficult to get a consistent shape throughout the entire surface and volume. But I'll do what I can and see how far I can really make this close to perfect. I'm going to do that from the other side as well. Push a little bit from here, push a little bit from here. I have to twist the ham a little bit to get some movement going on there between all the scraps. Then I will do that. And I can look from the side and see exactly how much distortions I have. And you can see there's quite a lot of distortions. This is why sawdust is always a better choice, because it's powder form, it can move around evenly, it doesn't form any lumps, and you'll have a better looking ham. So I've done as much as the ham allows me to do so. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to beat the ham from the top to try to push everything to the side and thereby create an equally distributed filling. So I'll take the ham, I use something with a flat surface, just be careful so that you don't hit your fingers or whatsoever, and beat the ham right on the middle. Don't beat the ham from the sides because that's going to push all the scraps to the middle, and then they're going to stay there. They're not going to be distributed to the sides anymore, and you're going to end up with a very lumpy ham. So only tap it from the top. I'm going to turn it around and do exactly the same on this side. So once we've done that, there is only so much more that we can do to make this a perfect round circle. But what matters really is the top surfaces. So any side that you're holding the ham up should be super smooth. If you have some wrinkles and some surplus around the sides, it would be nice to have that perfect because we are perfectionists, as most of you are. But what matters is the top. So if you've gone through like 2 days of ham making and you see that your ham has surplus on the side, don't throw the ham away. See if the top surface is usable, because this is going to burn, this is going to stain. It's not a precious item. You may even sit on it sometimes. So now that I've done all of that, I'm going to take my spray bottle and I'm going to spray some water on the top, and I'm going to press the top first to make sure that all of that is as smooth as it can get. And I'm making a rotating motion. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to slowly bring the iron to the sides, but I won't press it from the side. So I'm just going from the center to the side, turning the ham from the center to the side, and I'm going to repeat that. And that should create a nice dome for you to work on. And then just the sides a little bit. Careful for your hands because it will get hot. Steam will come out of the ham. Turn it around. Do exactly the same on this side. And that's it. Ham number 1 is done. So just as we did with our first ham, we have to look at our second ham and determine what geometric shape it's based on. Now, if we chop the front and the back side off, we'll have a long rectangular cuboid. So this is how it would look like. Let's say we have something like this for the front, then this goes towards the back for the side, and here we have our cuboid. Now, obviously afterwards, this area is rounded off and we have a rounder ham, just as we have now. But before we deal with the roundness, imagining the pattern as this geometric shape allows us to decide what the length is going to be of each panel, so the top panel, side panel, and the panels underneath. And then based on that, we can also determine the depth and all of that. Based on that, we can create our pattern. That is an easier approach than to just try to mimic this right from scratch. So now that we know this, let's create our pattern. Just like the first ham, I'm going to be drafting the small scale version of the pattern right here. And on my right hand side, I have visual representations of what I'm doing at different stages. That should make it a lot easier for you to follow along. So let's begin. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark my center line. Now this center line is representing 1/2 of the pattern. So each side of our pattern is going to be exactly the same as the other side. I'm going to mark the length. For now, I'm going to mark 20 on either side of the center point of my pattern master, like so. And then I'm going to square the top and the bottom. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to mark the top panel on either side of the center line. I'm going to mark 3 on either side for now, and I'm going to mark 6 for the bottom, so that the bottom is wider and I get a tapered look. Then I'm going to connect these lines, and now we have from the middle 1/2 of the total top panel. So this all together is the complete top panel. All right, now we have to mark the side panels. So if we look at this tapered cuboid, we'll see that it has side panels, and we can see the side panels here as well. Essentially, the first thing that we're going to do is mark and make this cuboid pattern, which when folded up just looks exactly like this without the purple darts. So the sides are narrower. On this schematic it's roughly the same, but I will make the sides on this one slightly narrower. So I'll mark, let's say, 2 centimeters here and 4 centimeters at the bottom, again to get the tapered look. Connect the lines, do the same on the other side. 4, 2, connect. So if you notice, I always make the bottom double the size of what I have at the top, just to get that tapered effect. Now, this area is going to be the side panels. And I'm going to highlight them for your reference just so that you can relate this a lot easier to what I have right here. Okay, so now we have the side panels. What we're going to do is we're going to mark 1/2 of the bottom panel, and the bottom panel, when completed, is exactly the same size as our top panel. So whatever I have marked as 1/2 of the top panel, which is 6 centimeters, I'm going to mark for the bottom panel. And at the top we had 3 centimeters. 3, 3. And I'm going to connect them with a red line because I have marked it here as a red line and here as well. So the red line represents 1/2 of the bottom panel. As you can see, this pattern looks exactly like this pattern. And this pattern, when folded, represents our ham in the most geometric form possible. So it's a tapered cuboid. But what makes the front and the back of our ham rounded are the darts that we're going to introduce. To introduce the darts, the first thing we have to do is first cut out our pattern and fold it along the right edges. So let's do that. I will leave a little bit extra at the bottom because this is tapered, and once everything folds, the angles may change. Once I have folded everything, then I'm going to cut along my green square line at the top and bottom. But I will cut along my red line. Now that I've cut it out, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to be folding the sides, which is my red line, onto the green line. So I'm bringing the center of the bottom panel to the center of the top panel. It's as if we are crushing the ham from top. And I'm going to do that on the other side as well. And no, we're not folding airplanes. Now that I have that, I will just briefly flip this over, see where the bottom is and where the top is. And I'm going to square from the center line across, because I'm going to be cutting from this line or on this line. And I'm going to do the same here. The next thing I'm going to do while I'm at it is I'm going to be marking the opening of our ham, which is at the base of the ham. So again, you know, about a finger length should be enough. So I'll put a notch here and a notch here, and then what I can do is open it up and mark it later on, or if you want to mark it already, just make 2 small snips on either side for your reference. All right, we have now crushed the ham from the top, and that has created creases on the side panels. And the crease of the side panel you can see being represented as this black line that I'm drawing. We need this because one of our darts is going to go right in that crease line. So how are we going to do the darts? It's very simple. We're going to go back to that folded state where we brought the bottom center line to the top center line, and we are going to mark a curve that starts from this center line, so from the middle of our cuboid, gently and smoothly bring it into the sides. And we're going to do that on the bottom as well. And it's really crucial that you go into the point of that center line. The way you have to look at this is as if you're looking at the ham from the top and the ham is crushed. So the top center and the bottom center are laid flat on top of each other, and you want to curve your ham from the sides. So I've marked this once because I'm going to cut it at once. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to fold this along the green line, just like that, on itself, making sure that my folded edges are matching. And I'm going to be cutting along these 2 curves through all layers. When I open my pattern, what I've done is I've created the purple darts here on the side, right here. Now we also need 2 big darts right into the center. And the way we're going to do that is instead of bringing the bottom center line and the top center line together, we are now going to fold along the top center line, so along the green line. And essentially what this is our ham flattened from the side. So it's a flat side view of our ham. What I'm going to do is now I'm going to introduce this big dart right on the top, and I'm going to do that by going from exactly the intersecting point of the side panel, and I'm going to smooth that into the top like so, and I'm going to do the same from here. So where we have the side panel border, which is this line, this is really the point that I'm going to create this purple dart on. And again, from the intersecting point of the side panel into the center. And so that's that. Now, once again, I want the same to happen on the bottom as well. So I'm just going to fold it along the center here, match the shapes, and then cut. And now when we open this up, we have our pattern here, and these are the purple lines which represent our darts. Obviously, I have a mark here for my opening notches, which is marked here, here, the other side. So when the ham is closed, this is what's going to happen on the machine. We will go on the machine, bring the center lines of the top and bottom together, and machine the sides only. Then we're going to fold along the top center line, and by that time the sides are already closed on the machine, and all we're going to do is we're going to go from one opening all around to the folded edge, and then we're going to do the same on the bottom from one opening all around. This will be machined through the folded edge, and that should make our ham. So now that we've drafted our pattern, let's go ahead and make it. All right, so we're ready to cut out our second ham. Now, the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to trace our pattern on the skeleton layer, and we're going to cut it out. Then we're going to trace our pattern on our fabric layer, which is the outer bag. And just like the first ham, we're going to cut 5 millimeters inside the marking lines. So let's begin by cutting out the skeleton layer. The first thing that I'd like to show you is that although we made a pattern that is one complete pattern, we had a center line marked in green. Now that center line marks the center of the pattern, and either side of that line is equal, is exactly the same. So to keep things simple, we can easily cut along that line, get rid of one half, and position this center line on the fold of the fabric. This prevents us from having to cut these darts twice on either the back or the front, and it will make the whole process a lot easier. So let's just put a quick iron on our fabric to get a good crease, and then put this along the fold. If you're using a fabric that is different on the right side than the wrong side, make sure that you're positioning it the way you want. So in my case, it's right side to right side, and I'll be marking on the wrong side. So patterns on, cocks on, and trace. Mark your opening notches. Make sure your notches are on the inside of the pattern, and cut out. And that's our skeleton layer cut out. Now, with the first ham, I was emphasizing that you should only mark your notches for the opening on one layer. Because this is one piece and these pieces are going to come together along the edges, that seam becomes one opening. So therefore, mark your notches on both layers, like so. So just a note here, this crease that we have now is the equivalent of the green line that we had marked on our pattern. And that means that it's the center of the top plane. The red line, so the edges of this panel, are the center of the bottom plane, which are going to be positioned like so once the ham is finished. So mark the outside, the wrong side of the fabric for your reference, and continue with the outer layer. Mark your notches, extend them, because we're going to be cutting 5 millimeters inside the lines of the pattern all around. Wrong side, and we can take them to the machine. Now, this is what's going to happen. For both layers, it's the same. We're going to have our inside facing us. Then we'll look at our center line, which is our fold line. We are going to bring the center line or the edges of the pattern, the center line of the bottom panel, like so, to the fold line that we had. And then we're going to look at the sides here, make sure that they match. And on all 4 sides, we're going to machine 5 millimeters inwards and smoothly fade that into our folds, like so. And we're only going to do that on the outsides. Then, instead of bringing the sides to the center, we are just going to fold the pattern along the center. And by that time, these darts are closed. And we're going to machine from one opening, a foot's width away, make a nice round at the point here, and then again, smoothly fade into the fold. And we're going to do that on both the front and the back. So, having said that, let's take them to the machine. Okay, so we're ready to sew our ham number 2. There is no felt involved in this one, although you can have felt involved, but you wouldn't have the felt machined onto the panels like we did with ham number 1. So let's begin with sewing our skeleton layer, and the way we're going to do that is as the following. We're going to open and have the right side up facing us. Then we're going to fold the edges onto the center line, and then we're going to align the sides. And what we're going to do is we're going to sew a foot's width right up from here and bring that smoothly into our folded edge and do a back tag here. And we're going to do that on all 4 sides. So we are not sewing the middle darts. So foot's width, needle in, back tag, and smoothly fade into the fold. Once you get right to the edge, do a back tag and do exactly the same with all other sides. Do make sure that your foot's width only trails off towards the edge when there is no more raw fabric visible. So don't start fading in right here because your seam allowance will be too weak. Okay, so now that you've sewn all 4 sides, we are now going to take the edges, which is the opening of our ham, and we're going to pull it out so that we fold the ham along the center fold. You can see that this is sewn up and that the shape is starting to emerge. So what you have to do is you have to open the seams with your fingers on both sides and make sure that your sewing lines are on top of one another. You can put a pin in there if you want to hold them in place. Then you are going to match your opening notches. Begin there with 1 centimeter seam allowance. So not foot's width anymore, but a seam allowance. Do a back tag and then move forwards and slowly halfway between the seam and the starting point fade into a foot's width seam allowance, continue a foot's width seam allowance, and then fade it off into the fold. All right? The reason why we do this is because the opening will have a lip that temporarily has to stay like this. And as we're stuffing this, if we have a too small seam allowance, the edges are going to fray and then we're not going to have a seam allowance at all. So that's the reason. Okay, so we're now on a foot's width seam allowance. And as you get to the top, you can just smooth this point slightly. Don't make it too round, but also don't go to a point. So just smoothly go over it and continue a foot's width until you reach the fold and just fade gently into it. Back tag, and I'm going to do exactly the same on this side. that is our skeleton layer done. I will do exactly the same for the fabric layer, and then we're going to move on to the board and prepare them for being filled up. So this is our top layer done as well. Obviously you will be using matching colors. I'm using a contrast thread to show you what I'm doing. But once you've done that, you should have this Zeppelin shape. So let's take this to the board and prepare it to be filled up. All right, now that we've machined our second ham, let's go ahead and prepare the seams. So the way we're going to prepare our seams is like the following. On the skeleton layer, I am only going to press the seams open where the opening is of the ham, like so. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to baste the seam to the actual fabric so that the seam is kept in place. I won't bother with the rest of the seam allowances because we're going to turn this bag inside out and there's going to be a lot of scraps in there. Those seam allowances are going to get lost between all those scraps. However, on the outer layer, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open all seam allowances all around and then baste them in place. So we're not going to push them to one direction. They're going to be opened up. And the reason why we do open the seam allowances on the cover layer is that this layer is going to sit on a relatively smooth surface. And as soon as we press our seam allowances in one direction, that could cause lumps on the surface of our ham. Now, the reason why I baste these seam allowances and I don't press them is because a lot can happen in the process of turning these inside out, putting this skeleton layer inside the cover layer. It may be that one of the seam allowances is going to fold over and then it becomes impossible to really have them open and stay flat. So let's begin with the skeleton layer. Open the seam allowance right from behind the opening. We have a centimeter seam allowance or 3/8, and I'm going to put a baste in there to keep it in place. That's one side, now the other. And that's that. I'm going to take the outer layer and I'm going to begin right from the points, put my finger in there, open the seam allowance and baste each seam allowance individually. You can do either a padding stitch or a running stitch as long as this really is held in place. You can take these points and just smooth them off by trimming the sharp corners away. And what you can do additionally is to just clip the edges or the corners of the squares that you have beyond your sewing line. And when you get to the opening, just continue folding the opening as well, just like we did on the skeleton layer, and move through the other side. And here I'm switching to a pad stitch because it's easier for me to hold the seam in place while I have my hand in the ham. And then here I will switch back to a running stitch again. And when you get to the end and there is a fold and you can't press that open, press it towards the bottom of the ham. So the bottom of the ham is where the opening is going to be. Tack it in place. So I'm going to do the rest of the seams. Now you may wonder when you get to the top, hey, I can fold this edge either to the left or to the right because I'm at the top and the bottom of the ham is really sitting right underneath it. Which direction should I go to? Doesn't really matter as long as you keep it consistent. I have pressed this one towards the left from my view, and I'm going to do this one towards the left as well, as long as it's really pulled open and there are no pleats in place. Okay, so now that I've prepared my seam allowances, it's time to turn our bags inside out, put the skeleton layer inside the outer layer, and begin the filling process. Now, you may wonder, what should I do if I want to put a layer of felt on top of my skeleton layer before I put it in the outer layer? Well, this is what you have to do. Position your skeleton layer so that the center bottom, so your opening, is aligned with your center top, which was our main fold line, and then you'll get the rough shape of the ham. Trace this shape on a piece of felt, turn your skeleton layer inside out, then while putting your hand inside the bag, put the layer of felt on top, Do a pin in the middle, then move slowly to the back, do a pin in the back, pin in the front, pin in the sides, just so that you have this nice and neatly laying on top of the ham whenever you press the ham flat from the top. So then your felt piece would sit on top of here. And don't worry about these bubbles that you get here. It's not really a big deal because you're going to fill this up so much that it's all going to push it out. So once you've basted all around the felt, you can then turn the fabric inside out. I'm ready to put the skeleton layer in here. Once you have the skeleton layer inside the outer layer, first of all, we have to secure the lips of the opening together so that we can fill this up without this opening, being pushed inside. And then after that, we can fill it up. So what I do is I go from the outside through all layers to the inside, and then go over to the outside again, from the outside to the inside, over the outside, and repeat. Fasten off and do the same on the other lip, and we're good to go. So now that we've prepared our seams and we've put the skeleton layer inside the outer layer, we're ready to fill our ham. Now, if you've made the first ham, you know that this is going to be a messy process depending on what you use to fill your ham. But if you are using scraps, it's definitely not going to be as easy as it looks. It's also a fairly time-consuming process, so do have some time set aside for this. What you'll need to really tamp down on these scraps and to redistribute them in case they create any lumps is a wooden spatula with a wide end, or I have a ceramic knife sharpener here with a wide handle, and this really allows me to have a good grip and really tamp down all these scraps. And if there are any lumps or you have to get to those points and all those edges, you can use something like this. Again, these are all tools from the kitchen. Something with a sharp end that allows you to go through and in between those scraps to get everything tamped down right all the way to the end. So, having said that, let's begin. I don't think I can get any more scraps in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to clear the board, and then I'm going to show you, just like with the first ham, how to close it off with a draw stitch. So just like we did with the first ham, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take away the stitches that hold the lips of both bags together. So this allows me to really work on the separate bags as I'm sewing them close. The first bag that I'm going to close is going to be the skeleton layer. I've threaded my needle. I'm using a double machine thread, black thread, so that you can see what I'm doing. And I have a knot at the end of the thread. Now, it may be that the end of your opening is pulled back or pushed back a little bit. So you have to really pull these edges so that it becomes visible. I will insert my needle so that the knot falls on the inside of the fold. So just pull this aside, put the needle in there, just bring it out right on the edge of just the skeleton layer. Like so. So the knot is now on the inside of my bag. Then I will continue doing a ladder stitch by inserting the needle inside the edge of my opening, of the fold of my opening, and I will move slightly sideways inside the folded edge and bring my needle out, like so. And I'm going to pull, and now I have inserted my first draw stitch. The next stitch is going to be right in front of where my needle just came out, so where the thread is now coming out. And the distance between these stitches is roughly 2 millimeters. We really want to secure them well to create a strong closure, because we know there is a lot of pressure on our ham. So pulling the thread is going to close these two stitches, and I'm going to continue like this all the way, and that will close off the first bag. Again, if I pull my thread, everything is going to be pulled together. And now it's time for me to do a fastening off, which is basically a back tag. However, if you've done this, first of all, it's going to look something like this, more or less. If you're using matching color thread, it's not going to be very visible. but generally it should roughly be a smooth surface. I mean, you're not going to get a perfectly polished surface until you press it, because there's a lot of pressure and tension on this area. Plus the stitch is not as fine as our 1mm machine stitch. However, if for whatever reason you have loose threads in between, before you fasten off and do your back tag, take a pin and insert the pin in between those stitches if you can, and just pull the thread up and continue doing that moving forwards so that you take out the slack between each stitch. But if you have done it as I have done it, which is, you know, you do 2 or 3 stitches, then pull your thread, by the time you get to the end, this should be fairly secure. So fastening off is very simple. We don't try to hide the stitch or the insertion point because this is the inside of our ham. We're not going to really make this difficult. So my thread is coming out from the top edge. I'm just going to go in front of it on the edge of my bottom lip, and I'm just going to do 1, 2, and 3 tags, and that's it. Then I'm going to cut my thread, and I have now secured the inside bag. I'm going to repeat the same process, and I'm going to close the outside bag with exactly the same stitch in this exact same way. The only difference being that I won't be doing a rough back tag at the very end. So I will still begin with a knot, but I will just end with a fastening that hides my stitch, just for aesthetic purposes. I think this is a great moment to just stop for a second and show you what happened. I was sewing all the way up till here and my thread broke. This may happen to you as well. So instead of starting all over again, I threaded my needle with a new thread. I made a knot at the end, and I inserted my needle perhaps 4 or 5 stitches before the last stitch. And now there is a knot behind where my thread is coming out, and I will simply go over my previous stitches and continue my sewing. If you're halfway through, there's no need to really take your thread out all the way and undo your stitches. You can just go inside the previous bites and continue your sewing. One tip that I can give you is that when you have done a few stitches and you want to pull your thread, don't just pull the thread. Squeeze the edges together first and then pull your thread. That puts less tension on the thread and prevents your thread from breaking. All right, so I have done my last stitch and everything is well secured. The last thing that I have to do is to do my back tag. Now, instead of just whipping the thread around the 2 edges and then having a piece of thread showing here, I'm going to go in front of the opposite edge. I'm going to go inside the opposite edge and just repeat my stitch by going inside the folded edges and looping back and forth inside these 2 looped edges. So my needle is going to go in the opposite edge, like so. And I'm going to come out again, just a small 2 or 3 millimeters. Pull my thread. Then I'm going to turn this around again and go back in the opposite edge, insert my needle, come out again, turn around, go into the opposite edge. So I'm just looping between the 2 folded edges. And then when I've done that 2 or 3 times, I'm simply going to go inside the seam and then come outside the seam slightly further out, and then I'll just go right behind it again, go inside the seam, come out slightly further, and I'm going to repeat this 1 more time, so 3 times in total. I'm going to cut my thread and we have closed off our ham. Now obviously a machine stitch is going to be way neater, But if you use a lot of patience and the same color thread, this seam will be as invisible as the rest of the seams. So I'm going to take the bastings out and I'm going to show you how to press the ham properly, and our ham will be finished. So now that we've closed our second ham, I'm going to go through exactly the same procedure as we did with ham 1. I'm going to push everything to the side to make sure everything is aligned. The seam allowances are in the right place. Push it a little bit back and forth to distribute all the remaining filler in the right place. Beat it from the top, press it down, and that will be the end of it. So let's go through that process. So I'm just looking at the seam allowance. Fortunately, on this small sample, everything is in the right place. There are no twists or bends here, so that's fine. So now I'm going to feel around and see if there is an area that has a significant lump that has to be distributed. I'm going to feel the sides, feel the top, the bottom, and it all seems to be good. Now, the ham is used in this way up. So the lower part of the ham, where we close it off with a hand stitch, is always going to be facing down. Therefore, I'm only going to press and beat the ham from this side. On the round ham, you know, you're just grabbing your ham and you may just use one side or the other. But on this ham, really, the idea is to use it from one side. Therefore, I won't be pressing or beating it from the side, just from the top. So, and if you don't want to hold it in your hands and beat it, just put it on a strong surface. I can't really hit on this board because it's very springy here. But if you have a stronger board, you can do that, or you can use the floor. After you've beaten your ham, take your spray bottle, just put some moisture on it and press. Begin from the center and slowly move your way to the sides. Just gently turn it over so that you can get to the sides, but always remain at the top of the ham. You can press this side as well if you want to just press the seam allowances, but it's really the top that matters. And as you're going to use these hams, you know, you'll be pressing it so often that this will just smooth out and flatten over time. So, having gone through all these steps, this is ham number 2. Now, to conclude, a ham is a pressing surface. A good pressing surface has to be smooth, firm, and absorb moisture. If you're drafting the pattern for your ham, always consider the 3D geometrical shape first, as that will make the drafting stages easier. If you're constructing your ham, use 2 layers, one for the inside, one for the outside. The inside layer can be made from a tightly woven linen or cotton canvas, and the outside layer can be made of a dense, heavy flannel or moleskin. I prefer moleskin because it lasts a lot longer than a flannel. And if you're filling your ham, regardless of whatever filler you're using, make absolutely sure that you're filling all the way to the end. If you've made a ham based on this lesson, share your work with us. You can do that by going to the community page of our website, and you can find the link to that website in the description of this video. I'm sure that some of you with a good eye for design have created truly beautiful works that will inspire all of us. Let's move away from those dirty looking hams with dodgy stains on them. My name is Reza. This was today's lesson, and I look forward to see you in the next one. Take care. You will need at least 1 to 2 days to go through all the steps.